But
All right,
today,
I'm ready.
officially, I'm joined by Dustin Hayes, the sort of DIY mastermind behind Walter Etc., a folk rock band who dropped their album when the band breaks up again last September. And to sort of just immediately directly push you into spotlight of this interview, if you don't mind, give a bit of a quick rundown to what you and the band do.
Um, wow, it's a little confusing at this point. Been a band since well, I first started calling myself Walter Mitty, like my junior year of high school when I was like 16, just because I wanted an alias. I didn't want to like be like a solo artist under my own name.
Hmm.
And I asked a bunch of friends to play with me and just play like, like tambourines and like train whistles and random stuff. And then I called it Walter Mitty and his Makeshift Orchestra. And then that was a band with kind of a revolving group of friends for a little while. Then it became like a band with our buddy Milk, Chris, my childhood friend, and then some friends, Jake and Russell joined. And we did some albums and a lot of touring in like college era.
Hmm.
And then after that, no one could play with me anymore. And I wanted to play some electric stuff, so I called it Walter Etc. So it's kind of the same band but like a different flavor. And we've been doing Walter Etc. stuff for like 8 years now or something, since like 2016, I think. And so yeah, it's kind of the same. Walter Mitty guys ended up playing in Walter Etc. And the Walter Etc. band that played this most recent album was me, Jake, and Chris, which was like OG childhood friends who started our first bands at the very beginning. So it's kind of all one thing under the name Walter, but now I have two bands, Walter Mitty and Walter Etc.
Nice. And yeah, and starting out, like you said, Walter, MIDI and Makeshift Orchestra, that's a high school band. And so you kind of started off and you have Chris on the drums as well. I guess sort of starting out, like, what were sort of like these loosely, if any, like loosely defined goals? It's like, I've decided that I want to make music, now what? Like what's the thought process and what are you hoping to achieve in these sort of like formative years of the Walter brand?
Yeah, in the formative years. Yeah, it's a really interesting question because I find like those what I want to use the band for kind of, at least the secondary and tertiary purposes change. But like in the beginning, there was always like, obviously, I just wanted to write songs and I wanted to write the best songs I could. And I wanted to say things that I'd never heard people say in songs before and whatever, yada, yada. So just the actual process of creating has always been the main driver. But the secondary purpose definitely in the early days was to travel. And I really wanted to use the band to tour so I could go see all different cities and states in the country and like meet a bunch of people and see the different scenes and yada yada. And maybe even go overseas, which eventually happened.
Yeah.
So that was definitely like the travel aspect was like a huge secondary goal of the band for the first few years.
Yeah, and honestly, on the topic of sort of using the band as a means to travel, see the world, experience new things and scenes, one specific question I guess I had is you toured a lot of places and you played a lot of venues. What does one have to do to book a gig at an adult video store? And are there any other notable venues in your historied career?
That's funny. Where'd you hear about that?
Honestly, I did a lot of research and I don't remember my source, so this might be totally
Yeah.
made up. I just know
No,
that I
no,
read
it's
it
true.
somewhere.
It's true, and I've definitely talked about it. It's just funny because I was just with so we played that was I don't know what year, but we booked our friends in a band called Modern Baseball. We booked their first West Coast tour, me and
Hmm.
Milk bandmate. And I think Milk must have booked that show because I don't really remember booking it. But it was just like classic DIY booking. Like you hit up like, who do we know in San Jose? We knew this dude Sim in the Albert Square, this dude Chris, and we probably hit one of them up, and they're like, oh, they're like this person at the porn shop is throwing shows in like the back room, and so we're just like any gig we could get, we would throw a show. So especially if it was like all ages and whatever, it wasn't like in a bar or something restrictive.
Yeah.
So we did it, but that night ended up being heroic because it was like Walter Mitty, Modern Baseball, Tiny Moving Parts, all playing in a porn shop in San Jose.
That is an insane lineup.
And then Jeff Rosenstock was there in attendance. Before I was actually friends with Jeff, I was just like a fan. We all were, and then we're just like, and I think no, I don't think Mike Park was there, but and it was just definitely like looking back, I was like, dude, what a random
What a
night.
night.
afterwards, the shop owner all let us keep, like, we all get to take home one porn DVD.
No way! Like a
It was so,
little gift bag on
yeah.
a exit. That's awesome. What a night.
I was just looking at pictures of that night a couple weeks ago when I was on tour with my friend Eric, who was like a part of that band.
Yeah,
And it was like pictures of all of us, and we look like children, and we're like holding porn DVDs. It's so funny.
that's awesome. That's fantastic. And you know, you brought up Milk, and I know that you've worked with Milk extensively over the years. Both of you being co-founders of Making New Enemies Art Collective. So how has working with Milk and also just various members of the collective sort of expanded the scope of your creative works and endeavors over the years?
Um, well, Milk completely changed my life. Uh, I owe so much to him, which is funny because I think he's a little mad at me right now because we kept him up really late playing music while he was trying to sleep the other night. But after this, I'm going to call him and apologize.
It's
But
very kind of you.
it's a couple days overdue, to be honest. I've been nervous, but I have to just call him and own up to
It's
it.
like a band-aid, just rip it off.
Yeah, honestly. Well, I should have done that the morning after, but been busy. Uh, anyways, Milk was like the first person to show me a lot of things and give me like the confidence to like lean fully into making like music and art my entire life. Because at the time when I met Milk, we were like freshmen in community college, like 18 years old,
Hmm.
and he was like really into making his own music, and I was really into making my own music. But I thought I would become like a fireman or like some other job that was not creative,
Yeah, just something different.
something different. And he thought he would go to like business school or like something like not creative. But then we had this like really monumental day in Montana de Oro on these big sand dunes by the beach in San Luis Obispo.
Hmm.
And we had like this euphoric moment where we both like realized that like fuck all of that. We just want to like do our music and art, and we would support each other. And then we like kind of took a vow, and we've been living that vow ever since.
Nice.
And then all these cool things that are in my life, like having an art collective, making new enemies, or like a photo blog that we call Jerk Season. Those were Milk's ideas at first, and I
Yeah.
just kept the torch alive. But Milk has like all these great ideas, and without Milk's collaboration and his ideas, like my life would be so much different.
That's fantastic. And you know, speaking of kind of like starting out, I know we keep going back and forth in terms of the timeline here. You know, Walter, etc., Walter MIDI, whichever project you would like to refer to, you guys are DIY to the bone, like persistently, religiously DIY. And I know that that philosophy is important to you all. So I guess what about that scene, that format, the sort of structure of music is so attractive or appealing to you? And what would you say, as doing this for a decade plus, are the pros and cons of kind of staying within that DIY structure?
There's a lot. Uh, well, just for the record, I don't know if anyone can really be purely DIY, and we certainly haven't been purely DIY. Like we've put out, like record labels have put out our vinyl and
Hmm.
sorts of stuff like that, But in general, we've done a lot ourselves, a lot of booking our own tours, and I like make screen print our own uh, clothes and sell my own online store and all that. And I don't know, I got really into it because when I was a kid, I was really into punk and like the ethos of punk. But then that kind of gets confusing as in like what is punk again? And
Hmm.
is it like an aesthetic? Is it a way you live life? Is it a sound? But then I learned in like senior year of high school, I started learning through bands like Bomb the Music Industry and AJJ and Defiance, Ohio and stuff, that whole scene. I started learning about what like DIY was. And I was like, oh, this is like a tangible philosophy that it doesn't have to sound or look like anything. It's like a way you do things that keeps you like closer to the source and like
Yeah.
the process of creation. And so that I was like, oh, like punk rock is like kind of a lie, but DIY is like a gospel.
Yeah. Well, AJJ has that one line, you know, I know that it's not punk, but I've got to pay my rent.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally right. But
Oh yeah, go ahead.
oh well, I was just gonna say the cons of DIY though are like, you can't actually do everything yourself. And
Yeah.
it's more of like a utopian vision than like a practical day to day. thing that you can like be pure about. But having that as like a base of how I think about things or how I do things has always been kind of like my North Star or whatever.
It's fair. And real quick, I do want to get into the most recent album, When the Band Breaks Up Again. I do have quite a few questions on that. But real quick, I guess sort of one more bit of a miscellaneous thing. The alias, this sort of whole alter ego of Walter, sort of developed in inspiration from James Thurber's short story, which was like 100 years old at this point, I'm pretty sure. So apart from hiding your music on the family computer under this moniker, using it as a bit of a cover-up, what is sort of like the advantage from a narrative, from a writing perspective of saying, you know what, I'm not going to write music under my name, but rather this sort of like alter ego that I've created for myself?
What's the advantage of it?
Yeah.
It's definitely fun for me, but I think this might be specific to how my brain works to
Hmm.
like kind of just blend uh, reality and fiction, and create kind of like a surreal landscape of my life and Walter's life and how they kind of like go in and out. Sometimes you can like I can stretch the truth or whatever because I'm not writing about Dustin. I'm writing like the story of Walter.
Yeah.
In other ways, the reverse side of that coin is like I could tell the absolute truth, but then put it behind the Walter name. And it's like doesn't have to be like straight Dustin because it's kind of like, no, it's like
Yeah.
Walter,
Gives you a bit of
It's like
room.
I can keep weaving in and out and like no one's really sure where I'm at. I'm not
Yeah.
really sure where I'm at, but I've grown to like it that way.
Awesome. Well, I think that we've established a pretty good context for who you are, what you do, all of the fun stuff. Now let's talk about the album. My first question being that a little while back you described the album as a project for people who are nostalgic for Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, but maybe with slightly more mature lyrics. How did the
Normal
early...
shit over here. I barely remember saying that. It's
I
funny.
listen. I'm picking up on things that you don't even remember. It's okay. I'm here to
I
remind
love it.
you.
I love it.
How did the early sort of you talked about like your dynamic with punk. Oh, I don't know if that's really tangible. Maybe a DIY. How did those early pop punk Cali bands influence the sound of this project specifically?
Um, I mean, this project is almost like the album when the band breaks up again. It's like simultaneously like genre or sound wise, it's like a period piece. It's kind of
Yeah.
like meant to sound like shit that we grew up on, which is like pop punk that would be in like a 2002 teen PG-13 movie.
Yeah.
Uh, and so all those bands that we would download on like Napster and Kazaa and LimeWire and watch music videos like a Sum 41 when you're 11 years old kind of vibe. But then more like lyrically or conceptually, the songs or the album's kind of like a not just specifically an homage to the music from when we were kids, but like an homage to like being kids because with Chris and Jake, because it was the three of us who grew up on punk together and
Yeah.
on this sound. So that's why we put like a picture of us at my eighth birthday party on the album cover, or like made some music videos that were kind of reflective of like growing up together. Because it's kind of like a little, I don't know how much longer I'll get to make music with specifically the three of us. And we started
Yeah.
like our first band together in like fifth grade. So it's kind of like yeah, both musically and like biographically an homage to our
Yeah.
youth.
Yeah, and you bring up like it, the cover art is you guys when you were kids. Like obviously a lot of this album is kind of centered around the fact that I don't know what I'll do when the band breaks up again. Will we ever see it in this form again? And I feel like the title track, which is sort of a thrashy like surf punk track, kind of embodies this feeling the most. And so I guess how does like the overall motif and the mood of this title track like work into like the themes of the album and how you're creating it? This idea that like we don't know when this is going to end.
What's your question? Like, how did it come about?
Y-
The
Yeah, I mean, like, how do you go into an album with that sort of like mentality in mind? It kind of feels like
Right,
existential in a way.
right. Well, honestly, I kind of always have that mentality. I'm kind of like a fatalist, self-saboteur, and it can be really annoying. And this album, I guess I just really leaned into it.
Hmm.
But I wrote that when the band breaks up again after uh I think it was like I might be crossing my memories here, but I think it was like after this wedding where like Chris, our drummer, my like, best friend since kindergarten was going away to Denver. He was moving out of California, and then Milk, like longtime creative collaborator, who like was kind of not really playing live in the band anymore, but he was still always there. And he was like, I'm moving to LA. And then our buddy Jake, who played bass, is like, I'm in San Francisco and got the real job. And so I'm just like, oh, here we go again. We don't have a band. And so I like went home and after that wedding, and I like quickly wrote the song like really fast, but I didn't think of it as like the concept of the whole album until much later.
Okay.
I kept writing songs in that like 2002 teen movie genre for fun
Yeah.
because it felt really good, and I was like, oh, I don't even have a fucking band anymore, so I'm just gonna write these shitty punk songs, and this is what I'll do with my time. And then for a long time I thought the album would be called Manic Pixie Misanthrope. So that's
Yeah.
kind of how I felt. I felt a little manic. I felt like a little pixie, but not, not in a stereotypical way, but like a dude who writes poetry at Barnes and Noble Cafe.
Yeah.
And then I felt like a misanthrope, like I was just kind of like pissed off at people in the world. So I thought that would be like the album title and the title track, and like the vibe of that phrase would be like the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then it was like right before the album was going to come out, I started being like, oh no, I think the album's more about like the band and
Yeah.
breaking up and like our story. And yeah, so then I like last minute called an audible and changed the album title and made that track one. And
Nice. And it's interesting you bring up Manic Pixie Misanthrope because that still remained like the title of one of the songs on the album. And like you said, the album feels kind of biographical in nature, and that song specifically feels biographical as well. Like these sort of documentation of like these mundane interactions and motions of other people's lives that you're sort of observing. And I guess that plays back into the sort of art collective question earlier, but it's like, how are just like these interactions and the life around you influencing your songwriting? On songs like Victims of Integrity, you have some commentary on people there. On Get the Fuck Out Thoreau, it's about this sort of social injustice that you're witnessing and this sort of like weird kind of complacency with it. So it's like, how are these things all happening around you influencing the way you write in a very personal way?
uh, well, I feel like I was kind of angry on a lot of these songs
Yeah.
because it's kind of sugary and like happy as they sound. But yeah, like GTFO and Victims of Integrity, it's definitely kind of angry at like, we just feeling like really like when you're young, you feel like you can really make a change, but then you get a little bit older and you kind of like you either become like jaded or you become like more angry and paranoid. And I just kind of like feel myself transitioning into that, like um I'm not going to write this like anthem about how we're all going to stand up and unite and fight the system. I feel more like frustrated and angry because I know how like impotent any cause can
Yeah.
end up. And so yeah, I feel like that's like a lot of the I don't know, I kind of lost the thread of the your original
Oh no,
question.
you're good. I mean, I think that was perfectly fine. It's I don't know, it's like you lose, it's like I'm gonna change the world. Like we can fight against this, and you get older and you're like, oh fuck, maybe not. Like at least not in the way that I wanted to.
Yeah, you realize things are like way more complex and convoluted than we originally
Yeah.
thought, and it's like it feels impossible to unravel. And that kind of like frustration of like the external world and being mad at like quote unquote society
Yeah.
kind of like blends for me in that era blended with the frustration of like not being able to keep a band together or like all get on the same page where we could like really make a go of it as a band.
Yeah.
And so I was just like angry in a lot of directions.
Yeah. And shifting away from maybe like the themes of the album and lyrical content, diving maybe into a more technical sphere, and I think Drown Enough is probably the most notable example of this for me, because I feel like the song, at least sonically and technically, stands out a little bit from the rest of the project. So how do you think that like the melodies and the structure, and I guess sort of the technical production of the songs on the track, what was the process of arranging the songs, and then how are these, as you put it, sort of candy coated instrumentals reflecting the lyrics of the song as well?
For the whole album or for Drown Enough?
For honestly, for any of it, anything that stands out to
Yeah.
you.
Um, well, the songs really came about like me making like shitty like computer drums and playing guitar, like really basic kind of
Yeah.
like power chord drums, put a bass on it kind of thing. Then we worked with Joe Reinhardt, friend, dude in like Algernon, and has his own studio headroom in Philly. And and he kind of brought the life out of them. You know, there's like I've talked about it probably a lot, but Chris only had one arm for this because he like broke his arm snowboarding right before we recorded this. So Joe helped us like do the drums in 2 takes, and Chris did it all with one arm. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It came together like a pretty, and then Joe made it sound really good, you know,
Hmm.
'cause he's a pro. So it came together all like really kind of besides the one arm drummer thing, like standard rock punk album. We played some of it live, some of it to click. Yeah, I don't know. I sang poorly. We tried to make it sound better. I sang a little better. It came out as it was, and then we all just have to throw our hands up in the air and be like, "That's what I sound like."
Yeah, like that's what we're gonna have to go with.
Yeah, this is like you take like a family picture at a certain point at each different part of your life, and then you're like, you can take as many pictures as you want, but that's what you look like at that point in your life, and
Yeah,
you keep moving forward and take another picture later.
yeah.
I don't know what I'm talking about.
I mean, you're making sense to me. All right, so at least something's connecting there. Um,
Thank you.
but if we fast forward to the end of the album with something to someone somewhere, I feel like me personally, I think this is a great song thematically and lyrically and sonically to end the album on. So I guess I wanted to ask you why that was the final song. You know, why? How does this tie the themes of the album together? And I sort of, what do you think? As this song closes out, you know, what do you think the album leaves you with, and how do you feel about the reception of the album that came after it? You know, how everything ties up together, and you know what your plans moving on are now. I know it's a bit of a loaded question, but you know, finality, moving on, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, if like as we talked about, the album's kind of like being frustrated with keeping a dream alive and being frustrated with making the world the place you want to be in. The last song, you know, it's like easy to like lose hope and kind of just like drown in a pool of nihilism and just give up. But the last song, it like literally in my real life came about because I did in 2021, I did this like all acoustic outdoor solo tour where I just like got in my mom's Nissan Altima and just drove up to like Canada and played in parks and like whatever outdoor shows.
Yeah,
And by the end of it, there was like big fires in the Northwest, and the person I asked to play with me in Seattle like canceled because like the air was really bad and COVID was ramping back up or something. And then I was just kind of getting frustrated. I was like, "Fuck, am I like making like people come out in like bad air conditions and like what is the point of me doing this like free outdoor tour alone?" And I was kind of going crazy at the end of it. And then I was talking to at the time my girlfriend on the phone, and I was kind of like telling her this, and I was just like, what am I doing? And then she said like, you know, she didn't say the exact words, it means something to someone somewhere, but like that was kind of her point. She's like, someone like people will come if they want to come, and like you'll make someone happy that you're out there doing it. And she kind of just gave me a little pep talk, you know, essentially telling me the moral of that song. And and then I played that Seattle show at Gasworks Parks, and like
yeah,
for me, a significant amount of people showed up, and it was super fun. I could tell it made people really happy, and I was just like, "Fuck, she's right." Like you, even if there's like despair, you like, if you keep going, it does mean something to someone, even if that someone is yourself, you know.
yeah,
And so that next morning, I like wrote that song in my friend's apartment. Shout out Chase, thank you for leaving me your apartment. And then I realized I didn't have the album or anything at the time, but later when I was like writing When the Band Breaks Up Again, the album, and then I was like, oh, that one song, and I was like, oh my god, that song is like the perfect like moral to the story or like end cap to like
yeah.
all like the frustration of the album. And so that's why it became, that's where it came from, that's why it became the last song. It felt like the perfect conclusion, and I still believe it. I'm still gonna
Yeah.
keep writing songs and see where it takes me.
That's good to hear. And I think that wraps up my album discussion as well, and I suppose in turn wraps up the interview. So I guess to sort of conclude what we've got going on here, is there anything right now? I'm giving you the opportunity to be as shameless as you want. Anything right now that we should look forward to, whether it be the band, other projects, anything that you've got going on right now, let me know. And if you've got nothing on that going on, that's also cool.
You want the full T?
Full T. Hit me with it.
Okay. Um, I don't have a home, and I'm going to Denver to see our drummer Chris. Uh, in like a week, and we're gonna record some songs that we might call the first Walter Mitty and his Makeshift Orchestra album since 2014.
Wow, bit of a comeback. Wow.
Don't call it a comeback.
Okay, a potential, a potential.
I was just kidding. I've been traveling a lot and writing a lot of songs, and they sound just like adult Walter Mitty stuff. And I figured, like I keep saying, like I figure my life is enough of a mess that it'd be fun to make it an even bigger mess and like revive the old band name and then just have both band names coexist, just because it sounds scary.
Yeah, some sort of extended universe of Walter.
Exactly. Just keep the multiple dimensions of the Walter verse expanding in all directions. So yeah, you're the first person I've told, but who knows if that'll actually happen.
An exclusive maybe.
An exclusive maybe.
Yes.
Exactly. It's a hard maybe, a soft yes.
That's okay. That's better than a soft no.
Right.
So, keep my hopes up.
As of now, in me and Chris's heads, that's what we're doing, and we're gonna probably record half the album and then reassess how it sounds and if we like the songs and stuff. But yeah, that's where I'm at. This
Hell
is me.
yeah.
I told you, Mama.
In all your glory.
In all my glory.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.